Good evening, everyone. You are listening to Coffee Talk with Samantha and Paul, and I have my co-host, Paul. I'm on the line with me. I'm Samantha Gross. And hi, Paul.
Hey, Sam. Good evening to you. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good, Paul. How are you doing tonight?
Yep. Doing all right. Yeah.
How's weather in California, Paul?
It's sunny and 83 at the moment.
Sunny and 83. Well, it's dark here, and it's about 45.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little chilly, but we did hit 50 today, so it was nice in Ohio.
Oh, okay. That's nice.
Yeah. So, Paul,
yeah.
First of all, let's update our listeners about your dad and your mother-in-law. What's going on with your parents, Paul?
Well, it's one of those, I won't get too much into the details. It's one of those situations we kind of have to let it kind of run its course.
Okay.
But, and it's probably going to be about 2 weeks duration. My Claire's mom's back home, though, thank goodness. She's at a hospital. She's been discharged, and so she'll be flying back from London tomorrow.
Okay.
And her brother's looking after her mom right now. So, it's good that she's back home. She's, in familiar territory, if you will. It's
right.
There's some of the hospitals that always been unsettling for me. It's like I always feel like I go in there with something and I leave with something else,
Yeah, yeah.
And you never get, if you have to stay overnight with something, you never get proper sleep there because the machines are always making a big old racket, beeping and flashing lights at you.
Yeah, they're flashing the lights and the blood pressure stuff.
Right, and they're constantly, making noises and whatnot and disturbing your what would be hopefully some rest that you need. But
right.
So she's back home, so thank heavens for that. So she's been discharged, so step in the right direction. And how about on your end? How are things looking?
Well, things are going on my end, and things are going a-okay, I guess, somewhat.
Okay.
I'm kind of fighting a spiritual battle right now, which is going to lead us into our coffee talk for tonight, everybody.
Sure.
I'm fighting the spiritual battle of, as our listeners know, and Paul, my son Hunter is autistic, and
yes.
Recently he's been having troubles going to school. And so...
You mean like going to school or at school?
Going to school. Getting him to school has been a big battle.
Getting him to school, I see. Okay.
To the
once
point
he's there, okay.
Once he's there, he's okay. It's getting him there. And Ohio has the law that if your child's not going to school, the parents can be fined and a misdemeanor and charged and everything else.
Yep.
So, luckily, thank God for the blessing that the doctors are standing behind us because Hunter is autistic and bipolar. And we have doctors' excuses and the school standing behind us. And the law is standing behind us, luckily, for right now for us. But I basically got a warning that Hunter cannot miss any more school. So it's been a spiritual battle. Everything just between that and financial and everything, which leads us into coffee talk. I was sipping on my coffee. I was sipping on my coffee, yes. I was writing on LinkedIn a couple nights ago about how, if someone, we're not fighting the enemy is not of flesh and blood. Like Ephesians 6 says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the spiritual wicked of the evil one, where we're not fighting each other. We're fighting a spiritual battle that sometimes the enemy, you can't even see what you're going up against, and the person that is coming up against you doesn't even know what's going on.
Sure.
And so you're never alone, and you're always fighting these spiritual battles. And sometimes, Paul, do you ever feel that it can just be overwhelming?
You just broke up, Sam. Say again.
I said, Paul, when you're going through a spiritual battle, do you ever feel that it can just be somewhat overwhelming?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. And it could be, like I said, it's not necessarily like when I'm fighting, like if against, even if in an argument with someone else, and It's sometimes difficult to remember that this too is also a child of God that you're getting engaged in a fight with or having a frank exchange of views with, and it's kind of difficult to remember that a lot that it takes a bit of a self-discipline to take a step back and think, okay, why is this person acting this way? Is this person lashing out? And usually, at least I found, if it's a battle, let's say just a argument that's really heated or something, they're not necessarily angry at you per se or fighting at you with the intensity because of something you did. It's something else that's plaguing them, which is intensifying the heat. It's like they could be in some form of physical pain. Something else happened earlier, or it could be something that happened earlier in their life that's been paining them all this time. And there's all these things been piled up on them, and you just happen to be the person there that pushed the wrong button at the wrong time, and they let you have it.
Right.
It's like the spiritual battles, even just within oneself. You're constantly wrestling against it.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And it can be anything from controlling your own temper to controlling actions, whatever the case might be. But yeah, sometimes it can be truly overwhelming. And a lot of times it can be so overwhelming that you're even unaware of whether you're the one instigating the problem or whatever the case might be. You just until the aftermath or whatever. And then sometimes you wake up the next day and you're like, yeah, what have I done?
Right. Yeah, it's one of those where it's like we go back to Deuteronomy, and I'm looking at Deuteronomy 3:22.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "Do not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God himself will fight for you." And then I jumped up to Deuteronomy 24. It says, "For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory." And I try to remember those verses when I'm feeling overwhelmed, but I've always been one to put on the whole armor of God, back to Ephesians.
Yeah, that's what Paul talks about, yes. Right.
Yes, and stand firm against the wicked. And when I say the wicked, I do not mean our own flesh and blood. I do not mean friends, family. I mean the spiritual wickedness. And a battle, a spiritual battle can be coming at you as, your finances are off today. It could be anything. It just becomes overwhelming. And so I'm just trying to process what comes from God and what is from the enemy. So that way I don't feel overwhelmed. Because if it's something from God, it brings peace. If it's something from the enemy, it's going to overwhelm me and scare me.
But sometimes but sometimes also what comes from the enemy, it will blindside you too, because it will sometimes it will seem desirable, and you don't realize it's coming from the enemy, because and that's like, for instance, you can think of it like sometimes people confuse entertainment with joy. There could be things where it's like, you really only receive, at least for me, it's like the only real joy I find is when I experience what I really feel is joy. I know it's something of God, let's say. But then there are times where it's like just through I guess if the source is through entertainment, let's say, it's not necessarily joy. It's like you derive some sort of a self-gratification or a personal satisfaction from something, or whatever the case might be, and you might enjoy it. But it's not necessarily from God, let's say, And sometimes you might not realize until in hindsight that, if whatever it was that you're enjoying or something, it could be possibly at the expense of others, it's only later that you realize, that really wasn't from God at all. It must have been from the enemy. But gosh, I was blindsided by that. How did I miss that? Well, we're not as smart as we think we are. If we don't if you don't have the wisdom, the spiritual wisdom to recognize that, yeah, we will stumble. I guarantee it. I do.
Yes.
I guess it's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, that's kind of mine too, Paul. It really is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, if it's from God, you can look back on it and you can have peace. But if it's from the enemy, if you have to achieve it by hurting somebody else, that's not really your blessing.
Yeah, the thing in Deuteronomy, they will protect you from the enemy. First of all, you have to ask yourself, you have to understand who is my enemy. Well,
right.
You also have to understand who is my neighbor, okay? And Jesus clearly says that everyone is your neighbor. Therefore, and if you can understand that, also, if they said like the Ten Commandments. Okay, remember there were several commandments like in the time of Moses, like 613 commandments, and then it was summed up in 10 commandments. But then Christ summed it up in 2 commandments, which could actually be, both commandments are actually so synonymous that it's almost one commandment, which is love God above everything else, and then love your neighbors yourself. And actually, the two kind of fuse into one, because as it says, as you do to the least of these, you've done it to me. In other words, as you love others, you're loving God, and in so loving God, you will wish to love others as well, because these are all children of God. So, knowing that, clearly these people around me are not my enemy. So who's the enemy? The enemy is evil forces at work, Satan, demons, whatever you wish to label that as. That's the enemy. And the enemy is quite clever and can infiltrate and have a tendency to, in some cases, even possess God's creation, us humans as well. And that's why we need to be careful. But that's why when, like Paul says, put on the whole armor of God, you can defend yourself. And then there's 6 pieces of the armor of God. It's like he talks about like the belt of truth, the breastplate of justice, your foot gear,
the helmet of salvation.
Yeah, then he gets
the sword of the Spirit.
Well, even before that, he talks about the shield, and that's to
the
defend
shield
yourself.
Of faith.
The flaming arrows. To defend yourself, but then he says the sword is the word of God, and that's what you. So
right, the sword is the word of God.
So the first 5 pieces, a lot of it is armor for protecting oneself, and especially the shield. But then he says you also don't just simply have to defend yourself; you can go on the offense as well, and that's what the sword kicks in.
Yeah.
And that is what it's referring to as the word of God. And he says that the enemy will flee from that, these evil forces or whatnot. And the thing is, I think even as Christians, we're kind of more on the defense, if that. Even at that. So a lot of us don't even engage in that either. But if we actually went on the offensive, you can actually see effects of that. You can actually help to rid evil. At least within me. Like, there's times where I recognize, okay, there's something awful happening within me right now in spiritual battle. I'll say, like, God, you take this evil out of me. It's like a poison. This is something that I'm sure that you don't want within me, my creation, which I'm your creation or whatnot. I've stumbled again. I'm stepping into this cesspool of filth or whatever it might be. Some poison of something that is harming my soul. First of all, thank you for giving me the ability to recognize that I'm affected. Now I'm asking you, please, can you rid me of this poison or evil that's within me? And literally within seconds, I can feel this being lifted from me. And again, it's kind of difficult to explain, and I'm sure, like I said before, each person's relationship with God or how they pray or whatnot is unique. But I think the more often you do it, the quicker the results are. And then you're like, oh, okay. And then you feel like a burden being lifted up from you. You don't quite feel that that tension, that stress, whatever it might be. You also physically feel better as well. At least for me.
Right. Yes, where you physically feel better. And you're right, Paul. The parts of it of Ephesians 6:1 are truth, righteousness, gospel of peace, faith, salvation, the word of God, and prayer.
Yeah.
And I feel if you get up every morning, I know, like, when I was young, this may sound a little corny, but when I would get onto the bus in the 6th grade, I would feel that people were going to pick on me. So I recited Ephesians 6, 11 through 20, 25? And I put on the whole armor of God every morning before I entered that school floor.
Yep.
And that's what I used to do. And I want to get back to doing that more often, like every day. I need to put on the armor of God every day.
And again, for each person, how they pray or whatnot, I've heard people that actually feel that they actually physically, as they're dressing in the morning, they envision themselves putting on armor.
Right.
Others, sometimes I just believe I've always had the armor on at all times. I don't need to keep putting it on and taking it off. It's always been on, ain't taking it off. So I'm assuming it's already there and in full gear, and that if I need to kick into action, I will. Or there's times where I think that even the spirit within me will say, hey, wake up, Paul, it's time to kick into action. Like, it certainly is. Here we go. So for me, it's like the armor has always been on. It's like why take it off? Why take it off the end of the day and put it back on the next day when you could be making yourself vulnerable? That's just kind of my take on it. But again, each person has their own unique relationship with God in the prayer life or whatnot, and if they choose to engage in putting on the armor. And again, you can think of it almost, it's kind of metaphorical and on a spiritual level as well. You don't necessarily have to think of it as true armor per se.
Right.
It varies from person to person, but I'm certain how St. Paul was kind of explaining it. It's like he used it in terms of analogy as well, so that the Ephesians would understand.
Yes. What did you say? I'm sorry, Paul.
Oh, no. I said that you don't have to necessarily think of it as being actual armor. If you're feeling kind of uncomfortable using that term, it's just that I think that's what Paul used, because I think he used analogies so that the Ephesians he was addressing would understand.
So that the Ephesians would understand. Yes, I think it is so we would understand it, because you're not physically putting on armor, it's spiritually putting on the armor.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't even necessarily have to think of it as armor. I mean, like I said, how one's prayer life is with God and recognize it. Sometimes you just say, I just simply, some people just might be just comfortable saying, hey, I just know God's with me. And that's enough. Because, it's like, I can't remember, is it with David? I can't remember which one it was in the Old Testament, but he said, like, I have God on my side, or I'm on God's side, so that's army enough.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like you can take on all the armies of the world. If God's in your side, like, that's all you need. That is army enough.
That is army enough.
You can think of it kind of like that. So it's like, if I'm with God and I love Him, and you dwell on, you might say, godly thinking or heavenly thinking or just wishing to be there, it all just kind of unfolds in
right
as it will. And the more you dwell in that, the less of a spiritual battle you even need to concern yourself with.
What do you mean by that? Dig into that a little bit, Paul.
The more you dwell, the more you are in thinking like God. Like if you're like in a prayerful state, and I don't necessarily saying set prayers per se, but if you're like in a prayerful state and in constant communicating with God and just like allowing to just, they'll say like just be still and know that I am there, is what like God will say several times.
Right.
If you can be in that state, you probably will find you're less and less engaged in a spiritual battle because you're there.
Right.
That's what I mean by that. It's almost like a small little bit of heaven on earth just for you. And when you're there, there'll be no need to be engaged in a spiritual battle because you're kind of there.
Right.
Perhaps it's just unique for me, but sometimes it's just like that. It's like, oh, okay, great. This is nice. And again, and I must, and again, I feel in a passive and peaceful state, very tranquil. Even now, amongst all these drivers around me, they're flipping each other off and cutting each other off and all of that. I'm just like, I'm chatting here with Sam, having some coffee and enjoying it. You know? Right. Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of my that's kind of my MO at the moment.
MO on life, on your take on things tonight. Yes, you're right, Paul. You're very correct. You're very correct. Well, Paul, this has been a good talk about spiritual battle. I don't feel as overwhelmed. I will let everyone know, and you know, next week on my overwhelming life I seem to have.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep, I hear you.
So, okay, but yes.
Alrighty.
If anybody would like to be on a guest on our show, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or message us on our website, CoffeeTalk.com. We're praying for you. We love you. And if anybody needs a prayer request, please feel free to contact us. You have a good night, Paul.
All right, you too, Sam. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Love you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.